Paul Manafort and Carter Page are deep state actors, yet they still got investigated and also wiretapped. And many people seem to get confused about this, so here is some clarity. Now, in March, President Trump submitted one of his most famous tweets. He said, "Terrible. Just found out that Obama had my wires tapped in Trump Tower just before the victory. Nothing found. This is McCarthyism." Now CNN and others are reporting that Paul Manafort was indeed under surveillance before the election, and he has had a residence in Trump Tower. Inevitably, both sides of the political spectrum claim victory. The left for possible vindication of Russiagate, and the right-wing or alternative right-wing for vindication of wiretapping accusations. Both sides now say we were right. Both sides make some fair points while ignoring others and missing the larger picture. The FBI was after Manafort long before Trump started even his presidential campaign, so it's a stretch to accuse the FBI of unfair targeting due to political favors. Now, in one of the media reports, we learn a secret order authorized by the court that handles the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, began after Manafort became the subject of an FBI investigation that began in 2014. Trump supporters and Democrats seem to flip-flop between sympathies and outright hatred for the FBI, depending on which politician is currently a target. Hillary was in trouble during her campaign for the email server affair, and certain statements from the feds were met with a lot of aggression from the left. Manafort is the archetype insider who supported the very type of foreign dictators that usually entertain relationships with the CIA, and he also worked for Bush Sr. as well as James Baker III and Ronald Reagan. Could you picture him as a CIA asset? I sure wouldn't be surprised if that was the case, and I would be even less surprised if the FBI suspected this all along. The FBI and the CIA have a complicated history. So who can fly around the world and meddle in highly sensitive areas such as Ukraine during the crisis of 2014? With high-placed friends like his, he wouldn't have to risk his freedom to make money for himself or halfway defect to the Russians like the left accuses him of. Just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. His old companion, the oily and eccentric Roger Stone, tells Infowars.com that an indictment is almost guaranteed. But still, ladies and gentlemen, that is a long way away from a conviction. I expect the national security card being played multiple times during an eventual court case. Can't talk about this, can't talk about that. And the mounting suspicion during a possible court case, suspicion that he is protected by the so-called deep state. The right wing right now is screaming from the rooftops that this whole Russiagate scandal is a made-up fabrication by the deep state and the Democrats, but that completely ignores the level of entanglement of Trump and his entourage with Russian players. Now, of course, I understand that Hillary also had some serious entanglement with the Russians, especially the Russian Silicon Valley complex, technology complex called Skolkovo. Now we've learned, this is just out today, or maybe it was already out yesterday, that Hillary had invitations going out to the highest level of Russian players, inviting them to some pay-for-play action with the Hillary or the Clinton Foundation. So yes, I'm aware of that, but still, Trump and his entourage have entanglements with Russians. The question is why? The left spreads the unrealistic assumption that Manafort, Trump, and the others sold out their country and risked everything just to maybe get some unspecified dirt on Hillary from the Russians in order to win the elections. Not realistic. Sure, Trump Jr. and his colleagues played a bit loose with regulations and were willing to listen to the Russians pertaining to dirt on Hillary, or possible dirt on Hillary, but so far, Russiagate seems less like a plot to win the election, but rather a deliberate entanglement to spy on Russians and simultaneously feed the Russians false information. So yes, Trump had some dealings and, property deals with some weird Russians and some weird intermediaries and some weird money. But Trump doesn't have to investigate where that money came from. No, he does not. But of course, in the current East-West conflict, it's of a certain meaning if there are these dealings, because powerful rich Russians might at some point defect to the West, and what's more efficient for that end to have some relations, business ties with these Russians. So things are not necessarily what they seem to be. We have to look at the wider picture. So it's more like a plot to spy on Russians and feed the Russians false information. Virtually nobody, except us and maybe some other place out there, virtually nobody has voiced the suspicion that the Trump camp could hypothetically be Western intelligence assets who played the part of Russia's friends for a while. It only adds to the confusion if you portray Manafort as a victim of the deep state and disregard all the evidence of the case. According to reports, the surveillance did not even extend to Donald Trump himself. Quote, the Justice Department and the FBI have denied that Trump's own wires were tapped. So this was targeting Manafort, who incidentally had a place in Trump Tower. Now, we don't see a lot of, or any Trump supporters defend Carter Page, who was also a target of investigation and who has also been wiretapped. Now, why are they not screaming bloody murder about the investigation against Carter Page? Well, because Carter Page is very much an insider, even more obvious than Manafort. His establishment connections are way too obvious. He served in the Navy for 5 years, including a tour in Western Morocco as an intelligence officer for a United Nations peacekeeping mission. In 1994, he completed a Master of Arts degree in National Security Studies at Georgetown University. After leaving the Navy, Page completed a fellowship at the Council on Foreign Relations. So there you have it. You can be under investigation and you can be wiretapped while still being an insider, while still being a player of the so-called deep state. Now, of course, the Justice Department and the FBI don't know everything. They're not being told everything. There's a certain separation in this New World Order type system. So the FBI might suspect something. So the FBI might suspect that Page could be working for the CIA, and Manafort might be working for the CIA, or in fact Trump might work for the CIA, but they can't prove it, and they're not going to voice that suspicion out loud. And of course we have to present to you all different kinds of possible and likely scenarios, so here you have it. And it's not just about picking the one scenario that suits you the most, that you like the most, and that you want to be true. We have to assign certain probabilities and keep these probabilities updated throughout the next months and years. So yeah, all kinds of people on the political spectrum have some interesting stuff to say and about this whole case. And of course, every side has fair points. Every side has exaggerations or maybe false information, is offering misleading information, but so we as press have to be able to sort that stuff out. Now, Trump is falling out of favor with some of his voting base, especially the alt-right or the conspiracy circles, conspiracy-aware people. They jumped on the Trump bandwagon, especially after Infowars.com jumped on the Trump bandwagon, and it would have been much better at the time, much more responsible at the time to tell the audience that, yes, go out and vote, prevent Hillary, but still Trump is an unknown. He has some weird friends and connections, and that's why And he's been known as a greedy businessman and nothing else, so be careful and hold him accountable from the first moment. Of course, you can't expect miracles to happen in the first days and weeks of the administration, but still, hold him accountable right away. And because of the Trump hype, because of this political messiah that was pictured, while at the same time InfoWars had added some disclaimers, a little disclaimer here and there. Well, Trump might betray us, and we're going to, be against him then, but still, it was 99.999% hype. And now the disappointment gets bigger and bigger. We have the CFR people in Trump's administration. We have the generals now, not just the generals directly in the administration, the McMasters and so on. But we also have more generals in the National Security Council, and some other people in the administration have military background. So that is not what people were bargaining for. That is not what people expected. And of course, we see now a escalation of the Iran situation. The threats are getting bigger. New sanctions are on the horizon. We see the whole North Korea thing, a possible trade war with China, possible hot war with China, and the Russia sanctions have not been lifted but intensified. So, yes, now also we have a new law being passed and signed by Trump against hate speech and hate groups, but this law is so shaky and poorly defined that this law could be used against Trump's staunchest voter base and supporter base, like the Infowars.com places and people like that. They could be targeted by this. And if Jeb Bush was president now, these websites, Infowars.com, would be screaming bloody murder and would announce the end of the world was here. But because it's Trump and they jumped on the Trump hype, the reaction is much more subdued, and it's rather a question of, yeah, we report on it, but we don't like it, but we're not gonna scream bloody murder. Now, Breitbart, of course, apparently has launched a campaign to burn Make America Great Again hats, increasing the pressure. We've seen that Steve Bannon, after returning to Breitbart, leaving the White House, being fired by the White House, whatever the case may have been, we've seen Steve Bannon presenting himself as this warrior outside of the White House, fighting for Trump, fighting against the deep state. But let's not forget Steve Bannon's own background. He has the national security training, and he's wildly connected. And it's also a continuation of a false narrative. So during the campaign, it was Trump versus the swamp. Trump and the swamp. Trump versus swamp. And Trump versus, the Washington elites. And Trump versus the neocons. Trump versus the military guys wanting to stir more trouble. And now, of course, that this narrative is sort of broken, it is still continued and patched up by twisting and bending the narrative to a point where people still believe it's Trump versus the deep state. Trump, he wanted to do all these great things, but now he can do these great things because the deep state has taken over the administration and has gotten rid of Trump's trustees, such as Bannon, and on and on and on. But the reality is, there was never a reason to trust Trump in the first place. And Trump personally picked these people for his administration. And he also had, I think it was the Heritage Foundation, very, very connected, pre-select people for his administration, right? So don't continue to believe a false narrative. And some of these places, such as Breitbart and Infowars, their initial analysis of Trump was deeply flawed, almost worthless. They should have never just blindly trusted him. They should have supported him to a degree, but not with the mania, not with the hype, not with these false promises. So, Breitbart, flawed analysis, heavily flawed. Infowars, their analysis, heavily flawed. They didn't do a proper basic job of assessing this guy, Donald Trump. So now these publications, who greatly benefited from the Trump campaign, you know, they got all this new attention, they got, in some instances, got White House press access, and a lot of information was passed to them, sometimes exclusive, sometimes not really exclusive, but they profited from that. And now it's pretty clear that they have disappointed their audience, they have let down their audience, but they don't want to admit that, and that's why they keep spinning this false narrative of Trump supposedly still fighting the deep state, still trying to fight the swamp, and the swamp being in the stronger position right now. So we're supposed to, you know, follow this battle for the next months and years, and keep hoping that the good side will win in the White House, and every time something good happens, maybe we'll get the wall to, you know, on the Mexican border, and that's going to be presented by Breitbart and Infowars as a success of Trump. And whenever we get something bad or continuation of what we've had for the last years and decades, that's going to be painted as a victory of the deep state. Okay, so I hope this cleared up some misconceptions and made people think in more clear directions. Please support us. Visit our website, eng.researcher.com, and support us on Patreon. And, of course, comment on this video and subscribe to the channel.